As winter sets in, there has been a rise in COVID-19 cases. It's been a journey of spiraling numbers worldwide, from 680 As winter sets in, there has been a rise in COVID-19 cases. It's been a journey of spiraling numbers worldwide, from 618 cases in March 2020 to 62.7 million confirmed cases in November 2020. 2020 has been benchmarked as a phase of public health emergency of international concern. The world still grapples with the pandemic. The battle against COVID-19 has taken a new gear this week, with prominent vaccine candidates showing positive results. The vaccines are showing efficacies of more than 90%. Several companies around the world are running against the clock to find the cure and vaccine for the world. In India, there are 3 vaccines hitting the top list of trials in association with foreign companies. Bharat Biotech in Hyderabad and Serum Institute of India in Pune are the front runners. Global drug makers Pfizer and BioNTech said their COVID-19 vaccine was found to be 95% effective in the final analysis of the Phase 3 trial. They have now applied for emergency authorization from US regulators. US-based biotechnology Moderna announced that its COVID-19 vaccine has shown an efficacy of 94.5%. The Oxford COVID-19 vaccine should be available for healthcare workers and elderly people by around February 2021, and by April for the general public. It will be priced at a maximum of ₹1,000 for 2 necessary doses, depending on the final trial results and regulatory approvals. The COVID-19 vaccine, Covaxin, being developed by Bharat Biotech, is now undergoing Phase 3 trials. The world of science and technology have come together to find a potential cure. 2021 will hopefully bring in a cure to vaccinate the world. The global community needs to wait till we excel in this mutual fight against COVID-19. Different scientists are working on finding a solution. They are sharing their perspective of the trials, challenges in the rush, and they're fighting out a roadmap for world's endeavor to vaccinate its citizens. Bureau Report, Democracy News Live, New Delhi.
It's a time of hope. It's a time for the world to find the vaccine and move on. The world's been held, it's been strangulated in many ways because of the pandemic. Possibly one of the turning points of the world, for the world to understand that this is not an easy time for anybody. It's a tough time for the population, for anybody, who's getting on with their lives. We're frozen in time, kind of. And so I think the idea that each one of us are, relying on is that the vaccine will be here soon and is going to make a difference. One of our challenges is going to be, is the vaccine efficacious? Is it going to be that we will actually have a vaccine that we'll be able to find, we will not be going back to COVID again? Will there be even a cure for it, possibly, that we don't have to take a vaccine? Anyways, to answer some of these questions, I'm joined by Dr. Jerome Kim. He is the MD, Director General of the International Vaccine Institute. Dr. Jerome Kim, I want to thank you again for joining me for this show on our, delving deep down into the idea of when, how the vaccine and where the vaccine is today. We discussed this a few months ago, and when we were talking then, we were looking at kind of a June kind of a situation where we will have a decent vaccine in place, and possibly even October by the time. But there seems to have been a bit of an advance. If most people are now talking, I was hearing the other day from Canada, they said we will be able to vaccinate about 6 million people by the first quarter of 2021. Is there something more positive which has happened, that we have advanced those dates? Or are we still looking at that June date as a possible time when we'd actually have a vaccine?
Yes, so those are great questions. Certainly having the proof of concept for an RNA vaccine, that an RNA vaccine, first of all, could protect against an infectious disease, in this case, COVID-19. And then the first proof of concept for an RNA vaccine at all. I mean, there have been no previous exemplars of RNA vaccines. And then certainly the AstraZeneca chimpanzee adenovirus vaccine, again, a very remarkable finding of 70% efficacy in the prevention of disease or infection. The Oxford trial was a little complicated, and we can go into that a little bit more. But I think the more pressing question, which is the one that you're raising, is now we have proof that a vaccine can protect. And at least at 2 months, and I think that's an important thing to emphasize, we have data at 2 months. So we have the proof that the vaccine works and is safe at 2 months. Can we make this vaccine now in significant quantities? And people all over the world are waiting potentially to receive their dose of COVID-19 vaccine. An organization called CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, which actually India was almost one of the founding members of, reports that the world probably can produce between 2 and 4 billion doses of COVID vaccine a year. That would mean that it won't be until 2023 or 2024 that everyone on the planet will be able to receive his or her dose of, or doses of COVID vaccine. So there's going to be some delay in ramping up. And I think the different companies have a myriad of commitments to various countries. So, the United States is getting vaccine from Pfizer on a relatively accelerated schedule. Moderna, which is also filing for emergency use approval this week, again, on the basis of 2 months worth of data, is saying it may be, first quarter of next year before they can ship adequate numbers of doses. So, we're really going to have to step back and wait and see what these vaccine companies can deliver. And I think the other thing to remember is they have to be able to deliver a product that is high quality, that meets the necessary standards for DCGI in India, or for the FDA in the United States, or for the EMA in Europe. And why was it that AstraZeneca had a half dose given as one of the different regimens in their vaccine trial? Was it in fact an accident? A very actually important accident, because the people who got the half dose first, followed by a full dose, had 90% protection rather than 62% that the bulk of people who got the standard dose got. So we did accelerate vaccine research and development. We have an accelerated proof of principle. At 2 months, the vaccine protects against infection or disease. We don't have much more than 2 months worth of safety. And importantly, we don't know how much vaccine can be produced. So I think, the head of the US Warp Speed program is saying, well, maybe by the summer, we'll have vaccinated enough people in the United States to achieve herd immunity. That's a guess. And we hope that we will be able to. But
yeah, I think
the
point you.
Sorry.
No, I think Dr. Kim, before we get to, by when people will actually get it, I was also wondering, you're emphasizing the idea that 2 months of data, which means we know there is no reaction in the body 2 months later after you've taken the vaccine, and you're still possibly protected. But it doesn't mean 6 months down the road or a year down the road, the vaccine will be effective to start with. Beyond that, what are the side effects of taking this vaccine is still we are not aware of. Earlier, a vaccine development could take as long as 10, 15 years by the time people agreed. For example, if we looked at HPV and, which we gave to young girls, we only found out years later or months later that the HPV vaccine had multiple issues that we had to, factor in. So 2 months down the road, sure, the vaccine may still be effective at, efficacy rates at 94.5%, but it does not mean it's going to last you 6 months or a year, or there'll be no side effects. So we are obviously looking. So this is one part of it. Now, the other part of it, Dr. Kim, is how long will the regulators stay? In the earlier days, they would have taken years to even, give you approvals. Will the regulators now have this accelerated pace of giving approvals?
So actually, a couple of things have been done during the COVID-19 pandemic that are a little bit unusual. And one of them is that at least the EMA has allowed what we call rolling submissions. So as information became available to the company they could provide it to the EMA for review. So, Pfizer has applied for EMA approval, emergency use, not true regulatory approval, licensure, but for emergency use. The Oxford vaccine, according to the Prime Minister of the UK, may be going forward for MHRA, so the UK's regulatory body review. And as they say, they are very, very exacting, but very nimble. And so they will go efficiently, they said, through the data. The US FDA is also committed to a very rapid review. So this isn't going to be the 6-month or 1-year review. They're going to go through the data. They're committing to do the same things they would do under normal circumstances, which is often completely repeating the analysis in order to verify that the data are correct. Now, you're absolutely right that we only have 2 months worth of data, but the US FDA actually indicated that this was a requirement because, after you receive a vaccine, the vast majority of complications occur in the first 2 weeks. And then the overwhelming majority occur within the first 2 months. So most of the negative consequences probably would have occurred within the first 2-month window. And that's what the US FDA required. Now, could there be very rare complications that are serious that occur at year 1 or year 2? Yes, it's possible. And, we had to wait until we vaccinated large numbers of people to see the complications from rotavirus. We actually had to wait 2 years to 3 years to start to see that some of the recipients of dengue vaccine had exacerbated disease. I mean, the vast majority were protected, but a few people who were naive, who had never been exposed to dengue before, had worsened, had more severe disease. And so those complications are things that happen even to licensed vaccines or vaccines that have been tested over the standard interval. And so countries and companies have to commit to long-term exacting follow-up of people who volunteered in clinical trials. And also, we have to be able to enhance the ability of countries to track side effects and to attribute them correctly to a vaccine. So imagine that in India, you have the AstraZeneca vaccine made by Serum Institute. You have the Johnson & Johnson vaccine made by Biological E. You have Bharat's vaccine. All of them are being used, and people start getting side effects. But which vaccine is it? So the government will have to be able to track who's received what vaccine so that as the side effects become known, we can attribute them correctly to the right vaccine. So it's a very complicated system. And India is pretty advanced in terms of its ability to manufacture vaccines, to distribute them, to administer them. How is this going to happen in other parts of the world which aren't as lucky as India is?
Dr. Kim, you've made 2 or 3 points. I'm going to again isolate them. First of all, tell me a bit about when you talked about the UK. Why was the Oxford trial a bit more complicated? And we had a little bit of a challenge there. Explain to the audience, when we looked at the Oxford vaccine, which is being produced here by the Serum Institute of India, where did the challenge sit, and how have we come past that?
Yeah, so it's actually a kind of an interesting finding, and so overall, the efficacy was 70% in terms of protection against infection or disease, and 70% is higher than the WHO standard of 50%. A standard of 50%, which was, they said, is the minimum requirement for a COVID-19 vaccine. So it surpassed that. The odd thing is that you can break the data down into 2 groups. A group of people who received a half dose, followed at least a month later, so maybe a month, maybe a bit longer, by a full dose. And then the vast majority of people who received a full dose at time 0 and then a full dose at least 1 month later. So 2 doses separated by at least a month, but full doses. The efficacy in the half dose full dose was 90%, which is very similar to Pfizer and Moderna. The efficacy in the group that got 2 full doses was 62%, which is still above 50, but lower than 90, or the 90% that other vaccines have reported. So that raised some important questions. Were they actually intending to test a half dose versus a full dose? And it turns out that might not have been the case. So it was a serendipitous finding, a very important serendipitous finding, but one that needs to be now formally demonstrated. Because if you find something by accident, a regulatory agency may say, okay, it happened by accident. Now, show us that it actually works that way if you do it on purpose. That being said, the Oxford vaccine has a tremendous advantage in terms of ease of use. And the manufacturing platform is one that we understand. Adenoviruses are used in multiple different types of vaccines, but there is an approved adenovirus, not chimpanzee adenovirus, but there is an approved adenovirus vaccine for Ebola. Actually, 2 approved adenovirus vaccines for Ebola. So again, there are some advantages to the Oxford vaccine.
And can you explain those advantages in terms of what are those advantages? If you can explain from one to the other, how is that an advantage?
Okay. So so we don't have all the information yet. So we're basing this on discussions and newspaper articles and press releases. So with that as the caveat, the Oxford vaccine is stable at refrigerator temperature, so 2 to 8 degrees. And when you look around the world, most of the major vaccination programs that exist in countries in sub-Saharan Africa or in India use refrigerator temperature vaccines. And that's very important because it means that a vaccine is manufactured at Serum Institute in Pune and then is distributed throughout India in refrigerated vans that keep the temperature around 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. It's stored in standard vaccine refrigerators that the Indian vaccination programs have. So all of that infrastructure is in place. The Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine are RNA vaccines. And right now, the storage temperature for RNA vaccines is much colder. So originally, the Pfizer vaccine had to be stored at the temperature of dry ice, which is -70 to -80 degrees Celsius. And that is a difficult temperature for us to deal with in public health settings. The advantage now is that Pfizer has managed to increase that temperature to 2 to 8 degrees, so refrigerator temperature, for a total of 5 days. So you could imagine that, if the infrastructure existed, you could keep the vaccine at dry ice temperature, ship it on dry ice in a special container, and then distribute it to a clinic where it would be used over the course of 5 days. A little more complicated. And when you're talking about vaccinating the entire population of India, that's a lot of complication.
That's a tough one
Moderna vaccine
to execute.
Has an advantage in that although it's stored at -20, which is still cold, and colder than we would normally expect, it meets the WHO requirement for storage at -20, long-term storage. Short-term storage, it can be kept at 2 to 8 degrees for 30 days, which again makes it a little easier to use. So when you're thinking about vaccinating 8 billion people, some of the limitations become significant. And when you're talking about distributing vaccine at -80 degrees, say from a manufacturing site in Korea or a manufacturing site in Brazil to another country and shipping it in an airplane, our airplane's equipped to handle -80 degrees. And so you can see that the people who actually give vaccines are a little more concerned about this.
No, I see your point, and certainly it's one of the critical areas of how do you handle as these vaccines come in, how do they move through customs, and how do they reach the clinics, and distribution networks are not that easy. One of the other points you made, Dr. Kim, and I want to kind of emphasize that, is who gets what vaccine, all the information to be kept intact, and which vaccines side effects are what. I think even for a country like India is a complex process. Forget, there may be others who may still be worse, but knowing the public health distribution system here and seeing it on the ground, I can tell you it's a tall order. If you actually get down to a village level, people may know that he's been vaccinated for polio, but they don't know which vaccine was given to them. There is no way of keeping that data. Even if the data is kept, it's kept in sheets. There isn't like a computerized system in place for doing all of that. They may claim there is, but there isn't. That's the reality on the ground. And so I think what you're talking about is a complete process around understanding how health officials will get this, who gets what, and how people are monitored. And I see there is a big gap in that whole monitoring system as well. I saw something out of Singapore that the health staff was having to submit their health data every 3 hours, and that was again done through having wearable devices, etc. But when I approached the Indian government and I was talking about why don't you utilize things like this which are available in the market, they're like, oh, it doesn't really bother us. They will be. I remember speaking to a minister, and he said, oh, we'll get herd immunity. I don't think a country like India needs to be worried about it. And I saw that gap in the minister himself, talking about not interested in monitoring it at a certain level. If ministers become that unserious about handling it, it becomes a challenge. So the point you made, and I want to re-emphasize that, is that who is getting what reaction from vaccine is going to be important in the case of corona, because it's new. We don't know what the efficacy is. We don't know what the reactions are. And so we will have to learn as we go by. Now, Dr. Kim.
And so, I'm sorry, you made a really good point. And not to say that the AstraZeneca vaccine is going to be, the idea. So again, remember, so in India, right, 1.1 billion people. Some people will, with the new dosing formula for AstraZeneca, so a half dose followed by a full dose, how are you going to know what a person got? So a mother brings a child in, and the doctor or nurse will say, so did you get a half dose, or how many doses have you received? And they won't remember. So, how you're going to administer two different, you're going to have to keep two different boxes in the refrigerator, one with half dose and one with full dose. So there are some complications there, and it may be possible. There may be simple solutions, like make one color, make one red, one blue. So you tell the mom your baby's getting the blue vaccine, and that when she comes in, she says my baby got the blue vaccine. So you have to give the red one. But we're going to have to think through these, and they're not simple issues when they're multiplied by the number of people who need to be vaccinated.
Sure. And when you get the half dose and it sits with you, and now the next full dose has to arrive only after a certain period of time, which means, because there is only that much window, and the difference between giving the first dose and the second dose may be a month itself. So which means both doses can't arrive at the same time. They have to arrive in different lots. And will the right dose arrive in the right region, right district, right hospital is another story. So I think we're at a very, very complex time. Dr. Kim, you're saying 2023, 2024, by the time the world is vaccinated. And that's with the present mutation of the virus. Each year, we may actually begin seeing further mutation of this virus. Is there a possibility that this vaccine maybe have to be thrown out of the window after we go through this winter?
Yeah, so there's always that possibility. I think the one potential theoretical piece of good news is that vaccines seldom become useless because of mutations in the virus. Now, the flu vaccine is slightly different because we know that there's variation in introduction strains of influenza. And so there's a yearly cycle of estimating what viruses will be present in the next year's flu season and anticipating what to put in it. For other vaccines, for instance, for the rotavirus vaccine, we developed the rotavirus vaccine. It was approved in the US in 2006. That same vaccine is being used today to prevent rotavirus diarrhea. So it really depends on a lot of features of the mutation rate of the virus. Now, what things about COVID-19 are bad? One of the key features is that COVID-19 spreads very rapidly. It doesn't tend to create many mutations. So I think the easiest way to think of it is if you think of the tip of a pin, that tip of the pin is the amount of variation that we've seen so far in roughly 10 months worth of whole genome sequences of COVID-19, 50,000 or actually more than that, of full length sequences. If you look at influenza, variation in a single year is about the width of my finger, which is much bigger, but 8 to 10 times bigger than the amount of variation in COVID-19. If you think about HIV, the palm of my hand is the amount of variation in HIV in a single country in a single year. So COVID-19 does have mutations, and those mutations can be important. They may influence spread. they so far have not been associated with escape from the virus, from the vaccine. The big concern, or one of the big concerns, is not necessarily, I mean, we have to track changes in the virus in human populations. But remember that we got this coronavirus, from an animal. So it hops from animal to human. And now in Denmark, it's hopped from human into the mink. And then it popped back from the mink back into humans. And that new strain, it's called cluster 5 by some of the scientists, may be slightly more resistant. But it's this ability to jump back and forth between animal strains that adds an element of unpredictability. And, as we commit to vaccinating people around the world, we at the same time have to commit to identifying strains of coronavirus, both jumping out of animal populations and also circulating in human populations, to continue to ensure that the current vaccine continues to protect people against evolving coronavirus threats.
Dr. Kim, you've raised a very important point. What you're saying is that earlier we were talking about only humans, having to worry about protecting themselves from other humans and, segregating themselves. But if you're saying it's going to jump from humans to animals, do we now begin segregating ourselves even from animals? So that means exchange of air, exchange of, or whatever in our interaction, does it need to get limited?
No. So I'm not saying. So there are particular animal species which are very receptive to coronaviruses. So, bats seem to be a common source. The bat coronavirus has made it into camels and then into humans. That's Middle East respiratory syndrome coronavirus. Presumably a bat transmitted a disease to maybe another mammal that then transmitted it to humans. At one point we thought they were spiny anteaters. But it makes a transition through these animal hosts and then into humans. And we know how this is occurring, and we can watch the viruses that are coming out. And I think one of the things that we have to do a much better job of is monitoring those introductions or potential introductions, and monitor the kinds of viruses that are circulating in animals that are capable of transmitting to humans. Now, I mean, we've already known that. So the mink and ferrets are animal models that we use to test COVID vaccines in, because we knew that they could be infected. So again, we just have to be careful around particular animal species.
Not all.
We don't have
so
to
not dogs,
animals.
Not cats, none of that.
Right.
Okay. Well, very interesting to know, honestly, because when you said that at first, I got worried in terms of, are people segregating away from their animals? And so I think I'm glad you cleared that.
No, my dog would be very upset.
Any closing words, Dr. Kim, on where we are at this fight and what do we need to watch out for right away?
So yes, thank you for this opportunity, because it's really a remarkable time. We've gotten now 4 vaccines with data reported on efficacy, and they are all efficacious. We only have 2 months worth of data. Hopefully we'll have additional pieces of data. The first vaccines are rolling out, and I guess the first people will be vaccinated this month around the world. We're anticipating having increased supply of all those vaccines. But remember that we need 16 billion doses. And one of the key things here is that right now we know that 8 billion doses of different vaccines, have been pre-ordered, primarily by high-income countries, but also by countries like India and Brazil. One of the issues is that there are other people on the planet who are susceptible to COVID-19. And modeling suggests that if the high-income countries take the first 2 billion doses of vaccine without any equitable distribution to the places that need it the most, global COVID deaths will double. And it will make it much more difficult to rapidly bring the pandemic to a close. The second, I think, important point is to remember that the vaccine, if we imagine the COVID pandemic as a war, the vaccine is a weapon, but you still need a good strategy. You still need a comprehensive program of prevention that includes the vaccine, but maybe at least initially for some period of time, masks, distancing, and hygiene in addition to the vaccine. And you'll need to then have an army that's going to take this vaccine and give it to all the people in the world who need it. So I mean, thinking of this as a war, we're at the first step. We really have to turn this into an effective weapon. And to do that, we have to vaccinate all the people who need to be vaccinated.
Dr. Kim, you made some really important points. One of the most important points Dr. Kim made was vaccinating the people most at risk is going to be the most important bit of it. So let's say the vaccine is available, giving it to frontline health workers, senior citizens, in the places that need the most and the people who need it the most. It'll have to be a global strategy. Otherwise, if you're going to double the deaths that will occur, I think it's an important point. The world politicians need to look at this seriously, in spite, for making their electorate happy. If they actually, help contributing to death, it's death which their decisions cause. So I think it's going to be a very, very important time for the world to come together and to make sure that we protect those that will be impacted. Dr. Kim, thank you very much for shedding light on these very important issues. Thank you for watching, and good night and good luck.